Sometimes you'll watch a movie or a show or you'll play a game and you can tell that it's definitely been inspired by something else. And if it's done tastefully without copying concepts directly, we remark upon it as the great cycle of artists inspiring other artists, how we might find other art that we may enjoy, and the history of stories being told and retold over and over again, going all the way back to Homer's The Odyssey. And if it's not done tastefully, it's called Close to the Sun. Warning, this video contains spoilers for Close to the Sun and the Bioshock games. Allison made another Bioshock video! This isn't the hard-hitting video about Native American genealogy that you promised me, Allison. Oh, I know, I'm quite aware, because I read a book and it changed my perspective and now I gotta rewrite the script. I frequently browse the Bioshock subreddit, and I used to be active in a bunch of Bioshock fan groups on Facebook as well, until they either turned into bot havens trying to sell t-shirts, or, ironically, extremist spaces. Anyway, one of the topics that comes up again and again is, what games should I play after Bioshock? What games remind you of Bioshock? I'm having Bioshock withdrawals, what do I play? And inevitably, somebody always brings up Close to the Sun. But why? So, where to begin with this game? When somebody tells you that a game that they played reminds them of one of your favorite games, as well as one of the most critically acclaimed and beloved games of all time, you're inclined to listen. Chris and I first played Close to the Sun in June of 2021 upon multiple recommendations from people online. Since then, it has reared its ugly little head to remind me that it still exists every so often, like that bi-monthly toothache that tells me that I haven't been to the dentist since high school. I don't have insurance. Anyway, Close to the Sun is a first-person horror adventure game published in 2019 by Italian developer Storm in a Teacup. It was made on the Unreal Engine, and it's currently available on PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and the Nintendo Switch. And if you've watched or read other reviews for Close to the Sun, then you've definitely already heard the Bioshock comparison. Bioshock is one of the most beloved games of the last 20 years, so people are reasonably grasping at anything with any remote resemblance to it. Like someone who believes they're descended from a Cherokee princess, buying a dreamcatcher from some white lady on Etsy and hanging it in their rearview mirror because it's the closest they'll get to feeling like an Indian. Whoa, sorry, that just kind of slipped out. Anyway, I don't want this video to turn into just a review, and to be fair, a lot of it is. But I'd also like to use this example of comparing Close to the Sun and Bioshock as a case study in how we compare media and how we engage with things that we like and why we like the things that we like. Why do people keep recommending this game as a follow-up to Bioshock? And what did people get out of Bioshock that they also found in Close to the Sun? And just so we are clear up front, I am not going to be very kind to Close to the Sun in this video. Also, this review isn't particularly a hot take. Several other reviews have already discussed this game. There are a few things worth talking about that I haven't seen mentioned elsewhere, so that's kind of my purpose for making this video. Let's start with the things that they ripped off of Bioshock. The things that were inspired from Bioshock. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about these, as other people have already covered them pretty extensively, but here are a few major things worth noting. A bunch of the world's top scientists disappear to a haven of industry and research at sea. The player character is dropped into this place with no knowledge of how things work after the place has gone to ruin. The paranoid leader of this place seems to have a god complex, and is an ever-present entity and threat. Player character sees ghosts from time to time. The surgeon with a German name wants to kill you. Art Deco. And as much as I personally dislike Bioshock Infinite, this game definitely ripped off the will the circle be unbroken thing from Infinite, for sure.
The circle must be broken. The circle must be broken.
On the Bioshock comparison, one of the developers has even said, "We hear it a lot, and part of us just takes a shot, and part of us high fives, and part of us worries about player expectations making that kind of connection. We see it as something positive, of course, but we want to be sure that players don't start up Close to the Sun expecting a Bioshock type of game." Oh boy, if only every person on the Bioshock subreddit and all the extremist Facebook groups could read that quote. Let's start with the setting. Close to the Sun rips off the setting and premise of Bioshock like an anti-vaxxer ripping off the super strength band-aid they give you at the Walgreens after your COVID booster. The level settings are lifted directly from Bioshock. The medical level, the greenhouse level, the engineering level, the theater level, the living quarters level, the the Helios level. The level names are also all named after Greek mythology. just like Bioshock. Though the levels are not named particularly well, like the drama of Dionysus. Like, yeah, I get it, there's a theater. Just slap on a Greek name with an alliteration, I guess. But you could argue that Dionysus was like a patron of the arts, but Apollo is literally the god of drama. The border of Hermes? What does that mean? Also, in this one level, everyone's wearing masks. What does that remind you of that we haven't already talked about? These surface level comparisons, as well as the, like, horror genre that Bioshock itself barely falls into, seem to be what most people talk about when recommending this game to Bioshock players. Before I get into the meat of the problem that I have with the setting and the game in general, I just want to say that, like, 90% of the setting is inaccessible and the doors are locked, and so it feels really, really empty. And the animation for checking a locked door is visually jarring, so the first 10 minutes aboard the Helios are spent watching the camera shake violently as Rose checks every single door to no avail, because there is no indication that you won't be able to get into all of these doors. I don't mind if the door is just set dressing, just don't give me the option to try to open it if I can't open it. I wasted like half an hour looking for keys that don't actually exist. And actually, every single door opening animation is really, really overdone and very difficult to watch over and over. Now, Bioshock also gives us doors that we can't access, but they definitely are more well built into the world. Like, this room's boarded up because the people who live there are trying to keep out the splicers. Oh, this rubble pile makes that whole entryway inaccessible. And I get that this takes place on a cruise ship bigger than the Titanic, and the Titanic was the largest ship ever made at the time that it existed. But the level designers clearly have no idea how big some of this stuff is, as this giant theater, this living quarters, these research labs, this giant electromagnetic pulse thing, or anything else would quite literally not fit into the space that they put it in. Bioshock's level design is beautiful but claustrophobic, and you can really feel how, like, trapped the citizens of Rapture must have felt while you're playing the game. Also, Rapture was first built in 1947, and was definitely inspired by the Art Deco style of the 1920s. The 20s came before the 40s, just so we're all clear. Close to the Sun takes place in 1897, and also is inspired by the Art Deco style of the 20s. There are touches of Art Nouveau here and there, which would be an appropriate style for the era, as well as, like, Queen Anne architecture, if you could fit that into a ship. But Art Deco is the predominant style here. For historical reference, Titanic set sail in 1912, which is a few years after this game takes place. If they really wanted the Helios to look like a ship from this time period, they could have just made it kind of look like the Titanic. And I don't know how many people notice this or care about this and are probably not as into, like, interior design as I am, but this is just the tip of the iceberg, pun intended, of anachronisms that are in this game. Let me say right now that generally I like historical fiction. Bioshock itself could be considered historical fiction. And you're allowed to take some liberties, of course, it's still fiction, but it's still historical, so it can't be too unrealistic, especially when it involves a real historical figure. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about anachronisms. So at first, as I said before, Close to the Sun takes place in 1897. However, this is an alternate reality 1897 in which Tesla wins against Thomas Edison in their infamous war. And it's not explained how or why. There are several other things in this game that you could brush off as being alternate reality, but truthfully, it just feels like laziness and inattentiveness in the writing process. You can't use the alternate reality excuse to explain away everything. Just so you don't think I'm being unfair, there are plenty of stories with this alternate reality premise that are good, actually. A good alternate history story is, of course, Watchmen, and it very clearly explains how the United States won the Vietnam War by having Dr. Manhattan. A bad example of an alternate reality story is Yesterday, in which the premise is, LOL, wouldn't it be cool if the Beatles just didn't exist, with no regard for how the Beatles shaped the world of the modern music industry? Your alternate history / alternate reality story has to have some explanation as to why things are the way they are, otherwise It's unfair to the consumer, and the story just kind of falls apart in your hands. And that's definitely what happened with Close to the Sun. Let's move on. I already discussed the Art Deco thing, which again I feel is just a direct ripoff of the Bioshock aesthetic because you liked Bioshock. The dialogue in this game is probably the most glaring anachronism. To quote TV tropes, a fair bit of the dialogue, particularly Rose's and Ada's, sounds considerably more modern than the setting would suggest. Certain terms they use, like nut job, nerd, and easy peasy, either didn't originate or become popular until the 50s or 60s. Rose even uses the phrase Scouts Honor a decade before the Scouts were founded. TV Tropes classifies this as artistic license. They also use the phrase holy shit and other very, very modern phrases.
Holy shit, Rose!
Ada! Secondly, both of these main characters sound modern. Going back to Bioshock, all of the spoken lines of dialogue are either heavily drenched in 40s slang or are performed in a transatlantic accent.
Now, I realise you're a posh sort of geezer, and frankly, I don't give a toss if you piss or go fishing.
Looks like things have gone busto between Fontaine and his little German beanpole.
Now, I'm a woman of science, but I'm also a woman who's not afraid of turning a buck or two.
It's not like the scriptwriters of Close to the Sun had nothing to go off of either. There is plenty of media that would guide them in the direction of how two young women of the era would sound, both in speech pattern and accent. So there's this bit of the story where Rose has panic attacks and Ada has to, talk her down from it, and she does so in a very modern sense.
On my voice. Breathe with me. One leaf in. One thorn out.
I tried to do some research on the historical treatment of panic attacks, which is hard to do without access to medical journals, but the short version is that at the time we thought that Freud was a genius, so panic attacks, like many other things, were tied to deviant sexual behaviors, and you probably just would have been given morphine. And also worth noting that the history of medicine is not kind to women, generally. Rose's one leaf in, one thorn out strategy is just not something period accurate. None of this, of course, matters in the end, because after Ada dies, Rose just gets over them, I guess. Smaller anachronisms that deserve to be included are a poster of Boris Karloff's Frankenstein when the film came out 34 years after the game is set, a recording of jazz music from the 30s. The one electron theory that this game relies on for its mysterious, sciencey nonsense was first proposed by John Wheeler in 1940, half a century after this game is set. John Wheeler wasn't even born until 1911, 14 years after this game is set. The art on all of the posters is decidedly 1920s and Art Deco themed. A modern map of the United States, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona were not states yet, and Puerto Rico is labeled by its name rather than just Spanish territory. The map of Europe is more or less correct for the year, but why not the States? Because the game is Italian, the main character is American though, so I don't know. These can't be chalked up to alternate history. It's just lazy world building and lazy set dressing. Speaking of world building, we need to talk about the plot. At this point, we've heard a million stories about how time is not linear, multiple universes, what happens when you mess with them, etc. The idea of scientists tearing a hole into time or reality or whatever is fascinating. The idea of scientists tearing a hole into time, reality, or whatever, and humanoid monster things coming out and attacking people it's been done. Despite ripping a lot of elements directly from Singularity, Prey, Dead Space, Stranger Things, and Bioshock Infinite, the story does have potential. Scientists push reality a little bit too far, and they rip a hole in time or reality or whatever, and it has disastrous consequences, and these monsters come out of the rip void things and kill people. This premise at this point is painfully unoriginal. Scientists push reality a little bit too far. They reached too close to the sun. Do you get it? Do you get it? At least Bioshock isn't literally titled Atlas Shrugged the game. This is from the Wikipedia page. Ada reveals that there was an accident in one of the experiments aboard the ship. The exact nature of the accident, as well as who caused it, whether it was overconfidence or sabotage, is not explained. I'm not expecting to be enrolled in a 3-credit hour class that explains every detail of the scientific theories that this game runs on, but science fiction has to be self-contained. Every science fiction thing in this game just kind of rebels in being mysterious and science-y. Unfortunately, it's not mysterious, it's lazy. Ada starts to give us some technobabble, science fiction jargon explanation, but Rose shuts it down because she just doesn't get science.
We discovered quantum resonance anomalies that prove the one-electron theory, meaning that every electron in the universe is the same one moving back and forth through time. So, naturally, we began to consider a second time dimension attached to the Euclidean analogy of Minkowski space. Now, I know what you're thinking.
Ada.
What about the Thomson conjecture?
Ada, stop. It's me you're talking to. None of that nerd talk.
Right. Okay.
The disaster that happened aboard the Helios that sets the plot in motion is literally reduced to a large experiment went boom.
A large experiment went boom.
What were they doing? I don't know. Rose doesn't know, and I don't think the developers know. You could argue that this doesn't need to be explained, like the briefcase machine thing in Inception, or the flux capacitor in Back to the Future, or to reference another piece of Tesla-based media, the Tesla box in The Prestige. You could argue that this is just the pill of suspension of disbelief that needs to be swallowed. Some people might be able to swallow that pill, and I could too if the game's entire plot didn't revolve around the mystery of this accident. Or if the rest of the game followed up on its plot points, but it doesn't. So this is just another example of the writers not knowing where it's going or how it's getting there. So let's talk about the characters, starting with our player character, Rose. I already complained about her anachronistic speech, but looking at her character and her personality, there is nothing that connects the player to her, besides her cracking a joke every so often, and I guess we want to save her sister. Her panic attacks, which I assume are there to make her more human and relatable, are completely inconsequential, as she just learns to get over them in a period of an afternoon, which is not how that works, but whatever. There's nothing inherently wrong with not having a silent protagonist, but in a game, you have to work harder to make the protagonist likable to the player. Rose interjects her thoughts all the time, and it leaves no room for the player to put their own feelings into the story. Rose also babysits the player through the exposition in case the player isn't smart enough to figure it out.
Seems like I'll have to let myself in. Quarantine? What have you got yourself into, Ada? Elevator up ahead. This is how suspected Edison spies get interrogated aboard the Helios. Confirmed Edison agents? Seems like their rivalry is alive and well. Maybe a ship full of scientists in the middle of the ocean. What could possibly go wrong?
You should not assume that your player is stupid, and this game does that a lot. It's worth noting that Rose doesn't do anything. She collects a couple of things, but the plot doesn't progress because of anything that she does. Things happen around her. Aubrey opens all the doors for her. Later, Tesla helps her out. Maybe at the very end you could argue that she does a couple of things at the right time, pull the switch to do whatever she's doing, but that could have been anybody. The next character is Ada. Ada is Rose's sister, and she's a scientist. Her personality is exactly like Rose's, except she's a STEM major, and she plays chess. I guess we care about her because she's Rose's sister, and she sent Rose a note to come aboard the Helios, or did she? Whoa! That also never gets explained, and she dies, quite predictably. If you're talking to somebody through glass in a video game, they're gonna die. Also, they call each other sis and sister, which is the biggest red flag of bad dialogue writing. If my brother called me sis, I'd be like, what are you planning? What are you up to? Do none of these writers have siblings? Do they truly not know how siblings talk to each other? Something that I wasn't going to add, but Chris brought it up without me mentioning it, was that are people really so starved for games that pass the Bechdel test that we're just gonna accept anything? Control came out the same year and is definitely the better of the two spiritual successor to Bioshock science fiction European-made games that pass the Bechdel test. The next character is Nikola Tesla. Tesla, in the first half of the game, is framed as the villain with a god complex. He sees himself as the fearless leader of the Helios, and by that I mean he has an entire room dedicated to his achievements. The small pieces of backstory that you find indicate that Tesla is paranoid of Edison's infiltration, and has even tortured people before. If we look back at Bioshock, this is a direct parallel to Andrew Ryan. Ryan has a giant statue of himself in the lighthouse. The propaganda announcements begin with Andrew Ryan says,
Andrew Ryan reminds us.
He oversteps his power multiple times, etc. He's a recurring threat, sending splicers and bots after you any chance he gets. He is, above all, paranoid about Fontaine or some other outside source taking over Rapture, even going so far as to hang smugglers in public. He antagonizes you as you get closer and closer to him, is a confirmed murderer, and all around not a great person. A complicated and good character, but not a good person. So of course you're like, oh, well Nikola Tesla is just this game's Andrew Ryan.
Another one of Edison's spies, I think. No matter. Movement throughout the ship has been restricted. Whether you are friend or foe, do watch your step.
So tell me, friend, which one of the bitches said to you? The KGB Wolf or the CIA Chekov? Here's the news. Rapture isn't some sunken ship for you to plunder.
And he is, until he isn't. By the end, you find yourself working with Tesla, and he even saves your life. Like, imagine halfway through Bioshock, like a Big Daddy knocks you down, and you wake up in the medical pavilion, and Andrew Ryan's standing there, and he takes your hand, and he's like, I know how we're gonna stop Fontaine. And then at the end, you go up to the surface in a bathysphere and live happily ever after. Why did they dedicate all of this time to framing Tesla as a paranoid egomaniac if they were just gonna pull the rug out from under the player? That's not really fair to the player. Like, there was no indication that Tesla had any redeeming qualities. This bait and switch makes for a really confusing story, and it's just the setup and payoff sequence that doesn't make any sense. Like, it's on the same level as, like, the Hans twist reveal from Frozen. Like, it was not earned at all. And not to mention, like, when it's revealed that Tesla's on your side, are you just supposed to forget, like, all of the torturing he did? Like, are we just gonna, like, brush that under the rug? Like, is that part of the alternate reality pill, too? And all of this exposition that you find in newspapers about, like, Edison trying to sabotage the Helios, like, it doesn't go anywhere. By now, most of the YouTube video essay watching public knows what a Chekov gun is. And this game would make Anton Chekov, like, riot. There's all of these loaded guns on stage, like, by the time you get to the end of this game, and then it just feels like you're walking through the NRA museum. None of these guns go off. I'd also like to say that for a game centered around Tesla's inventions, I don't think any of the writers know what a Tesla coil is or does. It's used for powering multiple electronic devices wirelessly, primarily light bulbs. Because they just, like, have one on and they put it in a room not doing anything except for shocking you if you don't correctly guess where the next bolt will hit. I'll get more into this game's, like, really dumb idea of what a puzzle is later, but I also don't think they know how dangerous a Tesla coil actually is. Like, it will shock you for sure without proper protection, but it's not gonna kill you instantly like the game thinks that it will. Anyway, there's a reason that Bioshock used fictional people. The next character, who is on the other side of the gotcha train, is Aubrey, who is predictably the villain. He feeds you many of the same lines that Atlas does, notably the I've got a family line.
But I've got family too, you know.
Listen, I've got a family.
He opens doors for you and guides you through your journey over the radio. Maybe this is just my media bias against German accents, but I knew immediately that he was going to be the villain. A crazy German when the main character is American? Oh yeah. He's definitely the villain. He has a clear-ish motive, I'll give the game that. He wanted to kill Ada, and subsequently Rose, I guess, because she was smarter than him. He also doesn't kill you when you finally reach him. Like, he gives you the most villain monologue of all time, and then just doesn't finish the job. Because plot, I guess.
You sly dog! You got me monologuing! I can't believe it.
At least Fontaine continues to try and kill you after he gives his villain monologue, and along the rest of the game. I'd also like to say that Wolf Collar, the voice of Aubrey, is the best performance in this entire game. He's really interesting and dynamic, even with a terrible script, and maybe that's because he's an actual actor with acting experience. I mean, he was in an Indiana Jones movie, for God's sake. A smaller secondary villain is Ludwig, also a German. He apparently is a known killer and just, stalks the ship looking for people to kill, particularly Rose, just because they wanted a horror game and then they forgot to add horror into the game. He repeatedly tells Rose that this is her fault, but we never get an explanation as to why he thinks that or whether or not he's right. He eventually falls into a flaming pit and survives, and then at the end of the game he tries to kill everyone except for Rose this time, conveniently. He just stabs her in the hand despite trying to kill her at every previous encounter. In the end, Aubrey sacrifices himself, I guess, to kill Ludwig. TV Tropes calls this a conflict killer. The last section of the game is basically a huge build-up to a final confrontation between Rose and Aubrey. Then Ludwig shows up and ends up becoming the final threat to everyone that's still alive at that point. Also, the Close to the Sun wiki says that Ludwig is, quote, according to various notes, Jack the Ripper. Going back to this moment, Tesla survives this because this game ends on a cliffhanger, leaving absolutely nothing explained. Tesla literally says, I know how we're gonna fix this, I know how we're gonna save Ada, credits roll. There is nothing wrong with a cliffhanger ending if it is earned. A great example of a cliffhanger ending is, of course, for the second time in this video, Inception. I'm not gonna spoil anything, right? Like, Inception came out like a decade ago, we're good? Okay. We know what the spinning top represents, and we know that Cobb is an unreliable narrator, and when the movie cuts to black, we get to decide for ourselves what we think. In Close to the Sun, we are not presented with all the information. We have no idea what caused the collapse of the Helios beyond scientists reaching too close to the sun, ha 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 ha. And we have no idea how Tesla plans to fix everything. We don't even know how Ada sent the letter to Rose in the first place. We aren't given enough information to reach any conclusion. In television or franchise movies, we are expecting a cliffhanger ending to some extent. We're being baited into wanting to watch more. A video game has no promise of a sequel, so when you leave your entire plot to be resolved in a sequel, or by the viewer, I guess, it's lazy. It's really just lazy. It's incomplete. They wrote half a game. Here's what the Close to the Sun website has to say about gameplay. I'd like to address all of these because they're all false advertising. First-person horror adventure where surviving is everything. They really narrowly avoided labeling this as survival horror because that would definitely be false advertising, because survival horror involves managing resources, like am I gonna run out of food or ammo, like that kind of thing. And in this game, you don't manage anything. Surviving in this game is just walking around until the game tells you that it's time to run in a chase sequence, and I will get to those in a second. Problem solving in order to progress the story. Just what happened aboard Tesla's ship. Problem solving is not really what I would say happens in this game. I mean, you could make a couple of guesses about what happened in the plot, but because nothing is ever explained, they just remain at that level of being a guess. There are a couple of good puzzles in this game, I will give it that. The elemental polyhedron puzzle was kind of neat because it actually gave you something to interact with. In any other game, that would be an entry-level puzzle, but whatever. The script says that my favorite puzzle was the wolves and sheep puzzle, but I wrote this months ago and I don't remember it because it was just that forgettable. So I guess that was my favorite, according to Allison 6 months ago. I didn't think it was particularly challenging or thought-provoking, but, quote, There you have it. Like I said, I wrote this months ago, but I do remember this. The most infuriating puzzle is this cipher that you find. Now, Chris and I are nerds, and we love a good cipher. So he spent a considerable amount of time deciphering it. Rather than rewarding you by giving you any sort of plot significance or anything related to the story, it instead says, oh my god, you actually did it. You are the best. Enjoy the rest of Close to the Sun. Are you kidding? You went through all the trouble of making a cipher for your stupid game, and that's the best thing that you could make it say? That's the best thing you could make it say? Did you drink your fucking Ovaltine?
Be sure to drink your Ovaltine. Ovaltine? Son of a bitch.
Also, I looked up puzzle solutions while I was writing this video, and there are 9 puzzles in this game, which comes out to less than 1 puzzle per level. And a couple of levels have multiple puzzles, leaving some levels completely puzzleless. And man, they are empty. Danger aplenty as Rose pieces together just what happened, having no real means to defend herself. Danger aplenty, you say? So a great horror game where you have to maneuver around a more or less abandoned place unarmed is You guessed it, Outlast. The difference is that Outlast lets you stealth, hide, and run, and you spend the entire time playing the game being on the edge of your seat. In Close to the Sun, you just wander around at a walking pace until the game tells you that it's time to run because something's chasing you in this chase sequence, they are infuriating. They give you this absolutely, like, useless ability to look behind you while you're running, and turns out that when you're looking behind you, you can't look in front of you, which means you're gonna run into something, and you're gonna get stuck, and you're gonna die, and you're gonna start the whole sequence over again. The chase sequences are trial and error too, so if you mess up, you just die and they start you over, and hopefully this time you make the right choice. And then the chase, it just ends when the game says it does. Okay, cool, neat. That was unexciting. All of your moves are planned exactly by the game, and if you don't do exactly what the game wants you to do, you will die. There was this one chase sequence where I just happened to run, like, it was around all these, like, tables or something, and I ran not in exactly the right direction that the game wanted me to, and I ended up dying, like, probably 10 times in the span of 2 minutes. It was infuriating. Another infuriating sequence is when you have to, like, traverse these, like, little metal walkways, and not get hit by this, like, giant electromagnetic pulse thing. It will kill you instantly if it hits you, and there's no way to tell, like, where is a safe hiding place and where isn't. So, surprise, surprise, this turns into another puzzle that is just trial and error. I actually don't know how to do this puzzle because I died so many times doing it that the game just put me past it eventually. Like, it just, like, Little League mercy ruled me. I can't believe it. Like, the game either thinks that I'm too stupid to play it, which you should never do, or it knows that the game is too hard, which is also not good. I also, like, I'm pretty sure that I fell off the map a couple of times because there were parts where I thought I was hiding behind something and I just, like, fell into a void and died. Teamwork with an ally who helps Rose navigate her way through the ship's artistic halls. I've already addressed this, but I'll say it again. It's not teamwork when one person is doing everything. Aubrey does everything for you. This is not a co-op with an NPC. This is just you walking along a predetermined path. Nerve-inducing exploration. Defenseless and weaponless, the keys to Rosa's survival are running, hiding, and quick thinking. A lot of the praise that I see for this game is about exploration, and I would have to respectfully disagree. There is absolutely no exploration in this game. It is painfully linear, more so than Bioshock, I would argue. You are not rewarded for exploring at all. Actually, you're not rewarded for anything, including beating the game. For such large environments, there's nothing to interact with. When there are bits of plot that, as we already discussed, are apparently meaningless, that you can find in the form of newspapers and other things to read, they are often long and don't provide any meaningful exposition to justify reading them anyway. You have to stop in an already boring gameplay experience to read a screen full of text. The great thing about games like Bioshock and Prey is that they have audio diaries, so most people can continue to play the game as they listen to them. Or at the very least, you can look down and read the captions without having to pause the gameplay. Prey does have things to read that can get kind of long, but it's not the only thing that you have to interact with. Again, almost nothing in Close to the Sun is that you can pick up and read is remotely plot related at all. It's mostly passports, photos, masks, blueprints, memos, and flyers. None of it matters to the plot, and none of it is interesting, so even if it does, like, do some world building, it's just not worth your time. Save for fetch quest items like keys, you can play the entire game without wasting your time looking for these things. This game was a whole lot of nothing beyond fetch quests in an empty haunted house. I'm not sure what this hiding thing is about. Like, you don't really hide from anything except for that one, like, electromagnetic pulse thing, and even that, like, the game's really unforgiving. Quick thinking, also not something that I would say happens in this game, except for, like, some quick time events, but those are pretty few and far between anyway. So having addressed all that, I'd like to talk about the infuriating controls. Little icons will pop up telling you to interact with things in certain ways, but you have to get the cursor to hover over a very, very small box, just a few pixels sometimes. Otherwise, it will not take your action input. This really sucks in chase sequences as they function as QuickTime events. It's also really infuriating with number pads or other tiny, tiny puzzle-related things because you just have to barely tap the left stick to move to the next key, and I spent 5 minutes typing in a 3-digit number. Sometimes you have to get, like, right up against a wall and walk across the edge of a gap, and moving 5 feet can take you an entire minute. There's also a jump button, but it's more or less useless. This game feels slow. Like, even the chase sequences are like, trying to get away from this violent killer. Oh yeah, and you take fall damage for no reason. The game will just slow down even further to show that your vision is going bloody and you painfully getting up. Well, sometimes it's kind of unclear. There's also no save mechanic, so have fun navigating that. Can we talk about the map for a second? Like, I'm gonna try really hard not to swear here. There is no map to show you how to access new levels or even a map of the level. There is a map of the ship, but it's so tiny that it's unusable in-game, and I don't think it's reflective of, like, gameplay. I swear that something in this game said something about, like, an easy-to-use map, and I can't find it now. Maybe I'll find it in editing. We'll see. But, like, the map is totally worthless. Let's talk about the graphics. The art is the best thing about this game. The art is good. I mean, it looks identical to the Bioshock remaster, but it's good. And I feel like this surface level similarity is all that people are looking at when they compare it to Bioshock. I lack specific footage for this because I didn't think of it until later, but we played on the Xbox and the frame rate was not always great, actually. As good as some of the environments were, the fire and water elements, especially in rooms with a lot of fire, looked comparatively really bad. It looked like N64 fire. And also, like, this is such a little thing, sort of, but in the game that everyone's desperate to compare this to, Bioshock, like, when you look out the window, you see, like, the skyscrapers and the neon signs and fish and it's underwater, and, like, it actually, there's something to look at. And when you look out the, like, 2 porthole windows inside the Helios, you don't see anything. Like, you don't see the ocean, you don't see the rest of the ship, you don't see anything. And while I get we're not, you know, seeing, like, a whole city, I want something to look at. Like, at least the ocean. The Helios is supposed to be isolated in the middle of the ocean, and while the game, like, wants you to feel that, I just don't. So, what did people get out of this? This game is painfully mediocre. It's not even a laughably bad Steam game. It's frustratingly bad. The unfinished plot of this game is probably the most unforgivable part. And if the game had actually tied up its loose ends, then I'm sure that my review here and many other reviews would not be so unkind to it. I could look past all of the meaningless collectibles and the painful anachronisms if they had bothered to tell us a complete story. The writers really wanted this to be good, and even with as many other pieces of media as it ripped off, like, the story had potential. Like, imagine if Stranger Things Season 1 ended after, like, 4 episodes, and it ends with Mike being like, I know how we're gonna save Will, and then, like, that's it. Like, Netflix would not have renewed it for a billionth season because that would be a bad and incomplete story. Close to the Sun is a bad and incomplete story, and it's a bad game. Anyway, like I said, I want this to be more than just me complaining about a game I didn't like, and I really, really didn't like this game. I want this video to serve as like a calling to hold games to a higher standard beyond just aesthetics. Just because a game looks a little bit like Bioshock on the surface doesn't mean that we should call it good or enjoyable. This game should remind us that the atmosphere and the gameplay of Bioshock are unique, that so much care went into the world building, the storytelling, the gameplay, the everything about Bioshock. Close to the Sun was just someone's cobbled together pile of things they liked from other games and spray painted metallic gold. If you truly felt like this game was a spiritual successor to Bioshock or a worthy follow-up for somebody who wanted more Bioshock material, I have to wonder if you actually played Bioshock or if you just had to write an article for some, like, no viewers IGN clone website. And I honestly don't know how it has so many positive Google reviews. Like, do people really just want, like, a pretty environment to walk around in? Far be it from me to be a gatekeeper, but is all you got out of Bioshock dilapidated Art Deco aesthetics with, like, baseline horror game elements? Not the political commentary, the world building, the incredible story with an excellent and earned twist? Is all you got, like, ooh, look at this, it's so pretty? I'd like to say that Storm in a Teacup is an appropriate name for this developer. Storm in a Teacup is an idiom meaning a disproportionate amount of anger over something trivial. And that is exactly this video about this game. Like, the game is bad, and I'm just genuinely in disbelief at how anybody could think that this is remotely Bioshock-esque in terms of quality. And here's the thing, the constant comparisons to Bioshock actually do both games a disservice. And frankly, this game does not need any more help with that. That quote that I mentioned earlier from the developer is kind of true. If this game had been marketed and understood as a museum game with like a kind of creepy atmosphere, and if the developers had, you know, disclaimered that they definitely took a lot of aesthetic choices from Bioshock, even if the story was incomplete and the puzzles are still bad, I think that my review and others would be not so scathing. But people with a bare minimum understanding of what makes Bioshock good and likable keep pushing the narrative that these two games are similar. And in my opinion, it cheapens the value of both games. Because if you want a museum game that's kind of creepy, like, this game is great. But if all you see is the comparisons to Bioshock and you didn't really like playing Bioshock, then you're not going to play this game. It seems like the developers themselves don't know what makes a game fun. Are all these, like, positive reviews on Google, like, just people who work for Storm in a Teacup trying to raise the review score with planted sock puppet reviews? Anyway, I'm just begging reviewers to stop saying that this game reminds them of Bioshock. I feel like that's not a lot to ask for. If you're looking for another Bioshock-esque game to play, don't let the reviews with the comparisons trick you into spending money on this game. Also, can somebody explain this to me? Like, how is the ship just, like, parting open? Like, how do you think a ship works? That's not how this works! Well, thank you for watching. It's Pride Month. Happy Pride Month. Buy my stickers on my Redbubble store. They are discreet pride flags, so if you're not out and you still want to have some pride, I have a ton of flags, and if you don't see your flag, let me know. I'll make you one. Otherwise, thank you to my patrons, Josh Ferguson, Dalton, I Am the Teacup, McAdoo, Alexis Womack, Brian Bards, and Avi Finkel. Thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate you. I will have my big video that I've been promising out very, very soon. Hopefully by the end of this month. We'll see. Thanks for watching!